Well, let's start with the clergy abuse issue because that's been a more complicated kind of journey for me, I think. Um, Officially, I got into treating victims of clergy abuse in the late 1980s, um, in which at that point, I mean, it was not being talked about. But a young man came to me and he wanted assistance. He was suing the diocese, okay, for them doing what they did. And he had been abused by a priest named Father David Holly. Now that's open information because um, he became notorious. And in fact, when I saw the movie Spotlight, his name is mentioned in it. And my goodness, that was like a punch in the stomach
Mm,
because I knew one of this man's victims, just incredibly. And so that exposed me to that. That was an eye opener. Okay. But in many ways, it wasn't because I'll just share with you very briefly. Um, Back when I was 16 years old, with this seminary that I told you about, or the religious order I was thinking of joining, I went to visit their seminary. And they had me room with a seminarian who was maybe in his 20s. And during the middle of the night, the guy tried to molest me. Okay. And um, the reality is, I was a pretty aggressive person back then. So I yelled at him and I cursed at him, and he backed off. I think I scared him and he backed off and left me alone. And at the time, I never really thought too much more about it. I don't believe I was traumatized by it, but obviously, I've never forgotten it. So when I began dealing with victims of clergy abuse, that rang a bell. Okay, okay, yeah. I wasn't nearly as traumatized as the way some of the people were that I dealt with. Anyway, so I dealt with this young man, read some of the initial reporting that was coming out. And what became apparent was that this Father Holly, he had been up there in the Boston diocese, as is portrayed in the movie, and he got into a lot of trouble there. And apparently, what they did was they shipped him down here. You know, poor town, ignorant people on the border there. What'll they know? Which made me angry. So that also exposed me to the aspect of cover up, because obviously, whoever was on the receiving end here in El Paso knew that this guy was a problem. And they did the same thing with him while he was in El Paso. They moved him around whenever he would do his thing. So anyway, met this young man, and because of that, the word got out that I was willing to treat victims of clergy abuse. And so, over the next several years, I saw a number of people, not all males, mostly males, but not all males, who, as children, primarily had been sexually abused by Catholic priests. And my status with that, my status with treating those people, my status with demanding that the diocese do something about it, did not turn out well in terms of my relationship with the diocese. For a time, I was labeled as an enemy of the church because I was supporting these people in whatever they needed to do. Um, that's not the case now. I seem to have a decent relationship with the current hierarchy here in El Paso, but for many years it wasn't because of that. And, I have no regrets about doing what I needed to do. Um,
absolutely. Yeah. What was hit pause here for a second?
sure.
What was the time period that you had this client, and then also when you were kind of at odds, not kind of, but certainly at odds with the diocese there because of the work you were doing in clergy abuse and
That
psychology?
that was in the late 80s, and it really went into the 2000s in terms of both my treating victims of clergy abuse and being at odds with the diocese because of that. Um, One of the things that happened was that I was interviewed on television. They called up, and this was in the early 2000s when the stuff in Boston was really getting a lot of publicity. And so this young reporter called me and said, I understand you treat victims of clergy abuse, which made me uneasy because that was all confidential. But she wanted to come and interview me. Well, about 2 years prior to that, I had written an article that came out in America magazine called My Church is Dying, which is what I felt at the time. Okay, I felt my church was in trouble. And so I wrote this article, which generated,
Because you were Catholic throughout your whole life,
yes,
correct?
sir, still am.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
still
Yeah.
define
Yep.
myself as Catholic.
Yep.
Different than when I was a kid, for sure. But
Yeah.
in any case, so I wrote this article. So at the end of the interview, she was asking me, and what do you see as the future of this? And I said in the interview, well, I have some fear that my church is dying. And so that created quite an uproar. I know that the current bishop, he's a fan of St. Anthony Messenger because I've shared with him some of the stuff I've written. And so that seems to, but it obviously had an impact on me in terms of my Catholic journey. All of that did.
Yep. That's what I was going to ask you about because I would imagine that as you are coming alongside these people, mostly men, like you said, who suffered horrific sexual abuse at the hands of clergy, that this would do something to your own heart, your own mind, and then also your own faith in relationship with a church in which you had always belonged. So, can you dive a little bit into that journey
Sure.
for you?
Sure. I mean, it obviously had an impact on me. In many ways, I was a little more bothered by the cover ups because I could understand that some of these people, they were troubled. Maybe they were mentally ill. Some of them clearly were pedophiles. And that's a very intractable kind of mental illness. And so that didn't excuse anything, but at least it made it understandable. But what I had trouble understanding were the cover ups in terms of people being moved around and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
And
and even blacklisting you, correct? I
absolutely,
mean, that
absolutely.
is an attempt at a cover up, and
Yeah,
you're in the middle of it doing healing work that the
right,
church needs to do.
right.
I think a lot of listeners would find that bizarre.
It was disturbing, and at some level, I mean, some of my friends, they thought, yeah, good for you, and speak up and blah blah blah. Oh, okay, I appreciated that, but at a deeper level, it hurt
Sure.
because my Catholicism was and still is important to me. So, obviously, and to be honest with you, Stephen, I've been a questioner all my life. So, I mean, I've had doubts that I've struggled with. Some of my writing has been about that kind of stuff and so on. So, this really fed into that in the sense of, well, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Maybe I should find a different path or whatever. And so, in the late 90s, to be honest with you, I took a sabbatical from the Catholic Church. Stopped going to Mass, stopped going to any kind of sacraments, stopped having any dealings other than with the handful of clients that I had. Took that time. I did a lot of reading. I studied. That was when I read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity for the first time. Some of Thomas Merton's writings, Henry Nouwen, who had already had a major impact on my life. So I went back to some of the people that I knew, and Thich Nhat Hanh, other points of view, other religions, and so on. And it was a very, very productive time for me. It caused me to reflect on, okay, what if anything is still meaningful to me with my Catholicism? Okay. And that's when I saw I missed the sacraments, I missed Eucharist, I missed the mystical element about Catholicism. And so I realized it was time for me to go back. Some different kind of thinking, some different things that I emphasized and looked for. And but that was a productive time for me, just to stand back.
Yeah, were you ever angry or bitter? I just cannot fathom the conversations you were having at that time with your clients and then reconciling that with this church that is also pushing you out.
Right. It was, well, see, that's why I had to accept that the church itself, the Catholic Church itself, was very flawed,
Hmm.
very human, and in my opinion, no different than any other particular type of church. And so, I mean, part of when I went back was that, oh, well, I have to be willing to accept this. I don't particularly like it, but I have to accept that this church is flawed. Okay, and the manner in which they have dealt with the clergy abuse issue is very flawed. But there was still enough there in terms of the essence of my Catholicism that has kept me going.
Yeah. Yeah, what did you? I'd like to get into your work with combat veterans as well.
Absolutely.
However, what did you learn from these men mostly who you were counseling? What struck you about them, and what impact did that have on not only your trajectory in life but also your own heart?
Well, I mean, these people to me were all courageous. They were heroes in my book. A lot of them stopped having anything to do with the Catholic Church, understandably so. Um, One man found some healing through art, did some artwork, and that really helped him heal. He had a substance issue. He managed to overcome that. And I actually heard from him a few months ago, and he's become a counselor. So I
Mm,
think what some of these people did was that they became wounded healers. You
yeah,
know, they
the
found,
great phrase from Henry Nouwen. Yeah.
like, that's changed my life, but we can talk about that another time. But you know, these people, they faced it. They didn't give up on God particularly. Some of them just gave up on the Catholic Church, and that was enlightening to me because they all were deeply wounded spiritually, beyond psychological wounds. They were just so sense of betrayal, anger with God, and so on and so forth. And they taught me a lot about what I would call spiritual courage, being able to
Hmm.
face spiritual pain and try to heal from that, much less the psychological part of the trauma.